Hello and happy Wednesday. Welcome to today's webinar, Contracting Goals and What Metrics Should You Track and Why. We are having had a little technical difficulty. I was saying earlier and probably jinxed us here, but I was saying it definitely felt like a Monday, and I have to go ahead and agree that it really does now. So we're going to dive back in. Again, I'm Ellen Nendorf. Joining me here is Michael Callier, Vice President, Head of Solutions and Consulting at Factor. And we are here on behalf of Agiloft. Danielle Hoagland was supposed to join us here today and had her own Monday experience. And so we're so grateful to Michael and Factor for stepping in at the last minute to keep this conversation going around metrics. Hi, Michael.
Hey, Ellen, how are you?
You know,
Happy to be here.
Doing well, all things considered.
Yeah.
All right, Michael, well, why don't you go ahead? I shared a little bit about myself. Let's introduce you to our audience if you want to share a little bit about your background, and then we'll dive in.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ellen. Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Callier. As Ellen said, I lead the consulting function at Factor Law. I also lead the solutions architecture function. Factor, if some of you may not know, is an alternative legal service provider recently spun off from Axiom. Factor focuses on delivering complex legal work at scale through a managed service model. And over the last decade, Factor has developed best practices and know-how to blend technology and process optimization with legal service delivery. So Factor Consulting will make those best practices available for legal departments and law firm clients to employ in their respective environments to support their journey towards operational excellence. Really happy to be here to talk about metrics, because that is a huge part of moving along the evolution towards greater optimization and client lifecycle management maturity. Thanks,
Yeah.
Ellen.
Fantastic. We're so excited to have your expertise on the call today, Michael. Just a quick reminder for our attendees here, you can ask questions as we move through the discussion. So if something comes to mind as we're talking, feel free to drop it in the Q&A box, and we will get to those as we can in real time. And whatever we can't reach to, we'll have about 15 minutes at the end today to take questions as well. So keep them coming. So it's a new year. We have made it to 2021, and last year, I set a lot of goals at this time, mostly charting out the exciting travel plans that I would have throughout 2020. And it probably goes without saying that did not come to be. And so I really wasn't brave enough this year to make any personal resolutions. How about you, Michael?
I did actually make a personal resolution for the year, and it's to do a better job of maintaining my Chinese language ability. That might sound a little odd, but I spent many, many years both in China and here in the States working on developing that capability, and I feel it's slipping a little bit. So my resolution is to stop the slippage.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And much easier to stop the slippage than have to start over down the road.
Absolutely.
And I feel like that's a pretty safe goal. Like you don't have to really rely on a lot of external factors to help you meet that, just yourself.
Yeah.
Well, there are other resolutions though, and that's what we're going to talk about today, that are safe to make, and making better use of your contract lifecycle management data is one of them. You know, there is so much out there, especially if you're using a tool, it's hard to know where to begin. And that's really what we're going to tackle today. I come from the e-billing realm, and because of the nature of spending and budgets and cutting costs, metrics are really the top priority right out of the gate. And you don't really know how you're doing on cutting costs without running those metrics. So it's a must. But with contract management, what's so interesting is that a lot of it is about improving workflow and visibility day to day. And so rolling out a tool, you actually can feel those benefits straight away without having to run a report. You don't have to run a report to know, hey, this is moving quickly. I can see the status of my contracts and so forth. And so it makes metrics not necessarily an afterthought, but it's not quite the pressing need that it is in other areas. And so we're going to dive in today just talking about metrics at the beginning, and how to really roll those into your daily habits here for 2021.
Yep, super important. Great New Year's resolution. I think this webinar will be very helpful for folks. In general, metrics, the way that I like to see it is what gets measured gets managed, and what can't be measured is very difficult to manage. And so talking about how we get our hands wrapped around what's going on in our legal departments from a metric standpoint and how we can leverage technology to do that is a really great topic.
Yeah, fantastic. So teeing up with that conversation, today we're covering what we're going to call beginner and intermediate metrics, and maybe more appropriately called concepts, right, around metrics. And so that will help you get started. We're also going to look at advanced metrics in another webinar later this month, January 27th. So for those of you listening who are interested in the more advanced steps, that is coming. So today we'll dive right in, and this isn't intended to be a hard and fast list of metrics, but rather some guidance to you on where to start with contract metrics. Michael, what are your thoughts on some of those basic metrics that a department can start with?
Just starting at the very foundation is a super important first step. The metrics themselves are around volume, what's on company paper versus third-party paper, and then contract type. Now, why are these metrics important? In large part, one, they help us to get our hands around the overall body of work in a legal department, which is super important. In addition, it helps us to understand levels of workload for all of our in-house counsel, and then that translates into determining resource leveling. Get into a point where we have the right folks doing the right work at the right time, and really understanding which internal stakeholders and clients have the heaviest need. And also gets us to a point where we can start to think about levels of complexity, because we know that, from the standpoint of streamlining, working on our own paper is much more predictable. Working on third-party paper can add certain complexity, particularly if we don't have a clause library in place or a playbook or something else that's designed to help us to achieve sustainable results and repeatable results.
Yeah, that's a great point. And what I love about this list is that I feel like when people see it, sometimes they can be a little underwhelmed, like, oh, I thought we'd be like tracking more, more fascinating things, but it really is about those basic components and what is going on. To your point, you cannot manage what you can't see or what you can't measure. And so this is the highway to that. Exactly.
Yeah, and another point following on that idea of underwhelm, getting to this point, it's actually an achievement. It's an undertaking to get there. And remember, taking a snapshot of these metrics is one thing, but having a system that allows us to continuously track quality data so that we have these underlying baseline metrics is another thing altogether. So there can be applause and sort of pats on the back for getting to this point. Also, as we think about these beginner foundational metrics, just want to encourage everyone listening to, rather than starting conceptually with the beginner metrics, start with the end in mind. Think about what you want to achieve with these metrics. And then as we work our way backwards, the concept would again be crawl, walk, run. Beginner metrics are at the crawl stage, but again, still a significant achievement.
That's a fantastic point. And let's head to the next slide just to give a visual of what you can expect. For those of you that don't have a contract lifecycle management tool in place, I think that you might be feeling just the challenge of getting one rolled out, or coming up with the idea, getting buy-in internally, getting the legs around you so you can start to implement. For those that have just implemented, you're seeing the benefits of your efforts, because just by implementing a tool, you can track these data points right out of the box. The nature of how the contract lifecycle management tools are set up today, you will have all of this data just by leveraging the tool. So once it's implemented, it's not like you have to redesign it in any fancy way to get this information. It's there. And these are just some examples of what you can expect to see. And to Michael's point, really then having this tool allows you to consistently collect that data. So you aren't just getting that snapshot, you're building this information over time. looking at what's happening today, tomorrow, checking in 6 months from now. And you're also able to see and make sure that folks are using the tool that you implemented as well, which is sometimes a challenge. So you can see where there might be holes in data, identifying departments that need maybe some retraining, so that you really are gathering all of that great foundational data to help you get started on achieving those long-term goals.
And again, those goals, these sort of metrics are critical for continuous improvement efforts. Again, as lawyers, we have a deep level of subject matter expertise and law in any particular area, whether it's commercial contracting, IP, litigation, whatever it may be. Marrying that subject matter expertise with process information like this, it's really critical to get into a sort of faster, better solutions inside of the legal department, as well as making our lives easier.
Yeah, I mean, that's really it. There's work in putting these things together and getting a tool and looking at the data and analyzing it to see where there can be improvements. But once that's done, it really does make a difference in the day-to-day work and workload. And so once you're comfortable with those basic metrics, once you have those and you're tracking those and you have a good visibility into what's happening with contracts across the business, you can begin to move on to the next phase of tracking, which we're calling intermediate here, but really just the next step forward with your metrics program. And, again, these are just some examples of what, might fall into these categories. But to Michael's point, starting with the end in mind, really understanding what your goals are, that's going to change maybe exactly what you see at this stage, but it's really, where you go once you have your legs under you.
That's right. And so, now we're walking with the intermediate metrics, from crawling to walking. And as we think about the purpose of getting to this stage in our metrics analysis and moving up the value chain, so to speak, with regard to sophistication, tracking overall turnaround time, cycle time, and contract value gives us some quantitative elements that we can actually combine, for example, with internal resource costing. And once we get to that stage, we can actually determine how much each contract, how much each area of work inside of our legal department from a contracting standpoint, again, whether it's IP licensing, commercial contracting, procurement contracting, how much each of that costs the company that we represent or work for. And so that when we make strategic decisions about moving to a low touch or no touch solution where our business stakeholders do the contracting based on standard templates and playbooks, or outsourcing to law firms or ALSPs, we can combine that strategic decision making based on our personal expertise with quantitative information, so that we can clearly indicate the cost or financial impact to the business. And we know, everyone who's worked inside of a legal department, that the language of business is finance. And so if we can translate our legal expertise into financial impact, then we start to move up the value chain inside of the organization into sort of a strategic business partner. And that's really where we want to be.
That's exactly. The strategic business partner is such a critical role. I was in sales actually for a time, and there's probably nothing worse than lawyers turned sales reps with opinions on how to negotiate a contract that you're not really supposed to be negotiating. But the point there is that the turnaround time on some of these things, the cycle times just in the stage of negotiations and red lines and so forth, that did equate into real dollars and cents, and it makes a difference on the ultimate bottom line for the company. And being able to have data to see where those where different cycle times or different allocation of resources is really going to drive the best result for the business just makes legal so much more invaluable to the process, and really shows an interest in not just answering legal questions within the company, but really driving overall business success. And so here's an example of what some of those might look like, just so you can see, you know, visually. It helps to understand, all right, what are we looking for? What can we expect? And a good contract lifecycle management tool will have these out of the box. So you're not having to build up these metrics from the start. You can hit the ground running with tracking very easily here. Though I do caveat that it's always easy to, I think, jump in and track more metrics, especially if you've just rolled out a tool and you're seeing all of the data that's in there and all of the potential to track these different types of reports. It's easy to get really excited about that. And that is, you know, fantastic to have that energy around metrics. But when you dive in by tracking too many metrics without having that idea at the beginning of like, what is our real goal with these metrics, I see two things happen. One is that there's so much data and it's not really getting used well because there's so much of it. And so then the metrics don't actually feel like they're useful, and then interest begins to fall off. Or two, the data is there, someone's taking time to analyze it, and now you have, you know, 20 or 30 issues that you can see, and it's overwhelming to try to tackle those all at once. So again, focusing in, as Michael said, on the, you know, what is the goal with these metrics and working towards that, and then taking that step by step is really an effective way to leverage metrics in your department.
And that's a really interesting segue. I know I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but I see that Emma Sharp, one of our participants, posed a question: why would you not include value of contract in the foundational level at the beginner level? And, you know, to Ellen's point, what we track at any stage should be customized to the business with the end in mind for certain, but have some sort of real life application, and importantly, be easy to obtain, to capture, and sustainably report on. So Emma, the idea here would be, if value of contract is easily attainable, then capturing that, incorporating into our metrics at that beginner stage could certainly be feasible. But remember, when we're first beginning this process, it's not just about it's not just about sort of learning from the metric tracking output. It's also about learning through the process of beginning to track metrics, because there are learning cycles in there. You're going to learn what metrics are useful or not. You're going to learn what metrics are easy to capture and which are not. You're going to learn which metrics your stakeholders actually care about and which they don't. And so really, the idea of learning requires, in part, that we change our framework on what failure means. You might come up, as Ellen said, with 20 different metrics in the beginning. If you whittle that down to 2, so long as those 2 are important, by the time you get to intermediate and advanced, you've actually succeeded and not failed. So value of contracts in the beginning, great, if you can get it easily. But it really depends on each individual environment, which metrics we focus on.
Yeah, that's exactly it. The metrics are really about turning the lights on, so to speak, so you can see what's happening and understand why, and being open to that learning curve, open to learning, open to changing in real time as information comes in. It's a new concept. I mean, not new concept is the right way to say that, but it's hard at first to make that change, but so helpful. And you know, what I find interesting about metrics too is so many people can think, well, if I start pulling these metrics, I'm going to get a lot of information. It might not be good information. It might show that we're slower than we need to be, or that there are problems that we maybe don't have capacity to address now. So we don't really want people, you know, seeing what's underneath the hood. But you might also discover that you're doing well already, that this is the fastest turnaround time for a particular stage, for a particular type of contract, or that for one business unit, things are really running smoothly, and maybe there's something going on there that would work well in other business areas to help the overall process too. So along with that learning mentality, the curiosity as well, like what's going on, where, you know, what's happening, how can we really move forward better as a department, as a business. Those are just really important to the metrics program that you put in place at your department. Michael, I'm just keeping an eye on our time. Are there any other thoughts you have before we transition into the questions?
Just a few, and I'll be quick because I'm really curious to see what questions our audience has, but just reinforcing a couple of things. One, start with the end in mind. Two, really be laser focused on utilization when it comes to metrics. Tracking for the sake of tracking is going to feel more like administrative burden for our stakeholders and may not be worth the time and effort. And also, lastly, crawl, walk, run, and celebrate those small wins because if you move into an intermediate stage with regard to CLM, compared to the rest of the world and the rest of the legal world, you're pretty far ahead and doing very well. So just those last points, Ellen.
Excellent. Yeah, it's a great positive note to end on there, Michael. So just we'll open things up to questions. We've had a few come in already. A reminder to the audience that there is another conversation on advanced metrics on January 27th. And so you can visit the Agiloft website for more information on that and to register. And then we'll go ahead and take other questions. One here that came in, Michael, that I'll pose to you is one of our attendees just implemented contract lifecycle management and is wondering, when is there enough meaningful data to really start pulling metrics?
That's interesting. So quick answer, 6 to 12 months. And I know that probably isn't the answer that folks want to hear because we want to move fast, but that's kind of a standard that we applied previously because you need to see cycles. And 6 to 12 months covers whether you're on a calendar year or whether you're on a fiscal year, what happens within your particular year of operations. And in large part, that's what we're trying to capture with data. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't start analyzing samples because you probably should. There should be some quality calibrations that occur along the way and probably even opportunities to show quick wins to your stakeholders because a part of winning hearts and minds with this process is to show them what you did. And so you can pull and extract, but relying intimately on that data and data quality before you get that 12-month cycle might have some limitations, but there are certainly things that you can do.
Yeah, fantastic. I don't think I have anything to add to that, Michael. We had another one come in, and this is just always, these types of questions always strike the ethical lawyer in me, but a question that came in is, what if when you start looking at the metrics, management wants to hide the errors and issues?
Interesting. I would love to hear more about that, actually.
Yeah.
I don't have a talking head answer for that. That's an interesting question. At a high line, look, it doesn't matter if it's technology, if it's data, whatever it is, if we are practicing lawyers or working for practicing lawyers, there's always going to be an ethical component to our practice and the advice that we provide. And so I would probably use that as sort of a, kind of a stake in the ground. And if, ethical issues defined by the state bar isn't good enough, you can always use the smell test or what would grandma say?
I like that one. And what came to my mind too on this one, Michael, is just that I think that speaks maybe to the interest in the department or in getting better, right? So you have a tool that helps in some regard. When we start thinking about metrics and what is our end goal, and your department doesn't really have one, like they're not really interested maybe in process improvement, that's going to tell you something about whether it's worth your time to invest in really tracking those metrics. That's not to say, give up and don't do anything, but really knowing what your stakeholders are interested in, which is maybe nothing, that tells you something. And then that also lets you know something around the culture of the company that you're at as well too. But so having those conversations up front around how do we want to use these metrics may help avoid some of those issues down the road where you get results that management wasn't ready to hear at that time. If you're working towards common goals from the outset, that can help stave off conflict.
Yeah, and really to drive home something that you said, Ellen, metrics are about learning. So whether it's learning about operations, whether it's learning about technology, whether it's learning about the substantive work, or whether it's learning about your community and stakeholders, all of it is learning. And from the scientific perspective, that means all of it is good. So feedback is good.
Absolutely. And we just had a comment come in from the audience, just noting that the data is also important for regulatory requests and updates as well in this space too.
Absolutely.
All right, it looks like we've got time for about one more question from a user who has been using Agile Contract Management for about 18 months and hasn't really delved into the metrics yet and looking for just where is that good place to start. And so I guess I would just refer you to some of the concepts that we've talked about today, really looking at what the goals are. Do you have, as a department, do you have some goals where you can use the contract data to begin to track and meet towards those? So having some internal conversations alongside, considering some of these beginning metrics that we had and shared today as just a good starting point to get a good look and feel for what's going on across the business. Michael, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Just to add one concept there, and kudos to you for getting the CLM in place and starting to track. If you're not sure where to go yet, the concept from me to you is the smartest person in the room is the room. Get folks together who are interested, smart, understand the business, and start sharing that data. Things will come out of that, and you'll be able to define a direction from there for certain. And we can help as well if you're interested.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I know I said that was the last question, but one more came in that really ties to that, which is, can you provide some examples of things people want to achieve with these metrics in their department? So, what is a benefit to my company of tracking X, where X may be something contract related? So just some examples of those overall end goals that a department might start with.
Totally. I can throw out a few. So one is going to be sort of a structured template approach to dealing with vendors, for example. If you can track cycle time and associate cost to working on your paper versus vendor paper, and you see that there's a significant cost uptick in leveraging vendor paper instead of your own, that is a justification to deploy a standardized template program and also communicate with those vendors in order to establish it. There's also an associated tracking with cost. Again, we're looking at how does this impact the bottom line as we communicate to the rest of the business. If we see that we can get a cost reduction by using a different outside resource provider, one law firm to another, if we can reduce the legal department budget by creating self-service tools internally. The only way that we can make that business case effectively, at least as far as finance is concerned, is by providing some quantitative data to support it. But there are a ton of business cases that would sort of exemplify the need and utilization of this sort of operational data. Happy to have that conversation further. As you can see, I'm excited about this because now we get down to the real why and what can we do.
Yeah, the fun stuff. Well, just keeping again an eye on our time, we are at the end of our time here with everyone. Thank you so much for those that attended and asked those questions. To Michael's point, Michael, myself, Danielle, the folks at Agiloft, we're all available for further conversation on this. So don't hesitate to reach out after the fact, even with questions that you might have. We would love to help you get those resolutions in place that you can meet some metric goals this year. So thanks to everyone for attending. Michael, thank you so much for your thoughts and expertise on this as well.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, Ellen, and great job moderating and presenting.
Excellent. Have a fantastic afternoon, everyone.